It's good to hear from you, Phil, there. It's kind of like, I guess yesterday we were hearing a lot about education being part of our DNA as being Presbyterian, And so interesting to see the Vanuatu churches kind of building schools and the school in India and stuff. And, the thing about Phil is, like, he's kind of like almost talking like, oh, we're in a pause situation, we can do this again in a couple of years' time. But, getting to share the same office as Phil, the work he's done in the last year has been incredible, because he's a people person, he's relational, and he's been in this role for 7 years. And so he's getting WhatsApps and text messages from people that are dying in Myanmar, and people that are struggling with cyclones, and the work that he's been able to do in a different kind of way in the last year has been incredible, with supporting people, Myanmar, getting money into there, supporting medically in there, same with the cyclone in Vanuatu. So really blessed as a church, and as part of our Presbyterian family in this country to have Phil. Anyway. Tēnā koutou katoa ko tinto te mauna ko Clyde te awa ko te rererangi te waka ko Ngāti koutou mauna te iwi ko Gordon Fitch te kumina no reira. Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Gordon Fitch. Today I'll be speaking from a youth ministry perspective. I do that 3 days a week. My ancestry is Scottish. My parents shifted to London when I'd been conceived but not yet born. My mum was 3 months pregnant, and for economical reasons my dad he's an accountant, got a job in London, and so we shifted to London. And my parents being good Scottish people, after I was born 6 months later, wanted to get me baptised, but of course, being Scottish, drove back up north of the border to get me baptised in a proper Scottish church. And that was the sort of thing that I kind of grew up, my dad wearing a kilt every Sunday to church, and so I was definitely growing up in England knowing that I was Scottish. And at the age of 13, I got to, I guess, as a family, we moved home, though I certainly felt English as I was sitting in a school in the west of Scotland trying to understand the accent. Did high school there, did university there, and spent a couple of years after university volunteering in your profession, I guess, teaching English and mathematics to underprivileged kids in the States, and so in awe of the line of work of teaching and making an impact in future generations. That sort of sense of calling that you have. I met my future wife Amanda there. After a while, moved back to Scotland where I was a youth worker in Troon, in the west of Scotland. Got married, had a couple of kids in Scotland before moving to the States for 5 years. I was a youth worker in the Seattle area, and then finally moving up the chain of countries to move here to Aotearoa, New Zealand, 11 years ago. We heard yesterday about the different sort of religious education sort of system between the UK and here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, in the public sphere. And so, yes, as a youth worker working for 3 churches in Troon, I was kind of plugged into the school system, and I would kind of go along and get involved in the high schools and the primary schools. In fact, I was probably in the school most days of the week when I was working in Troon, in assemblies, in RE classes, in Christian clubs at lunchtime. Very occasionally we'd have sort of Christian focus weeks as well. And, as a 20-something, I really enjoyed kind of rocking into church, into school assemblies where kids would stand up. It made me feel kind of good as a 20-year-old, I guess. Teachers telling me, oh yeah, you really connect well with the young people. Some of the other older ministers that come here that don't really quite connect as well. So I kind of feel pretty good about myself in a sort of, I guess a nonsensical way. But I was really humbled on one particular school assembly. It was a time that, it was a Remembrance Day service, and the person that was on the rota that day to do this assembly was a guy called Bob, a retired minister. And he kind of contacted me a couple of weeks before. He goes, as part of my assembly, I just want to show a 2-minute VHS tape. I guess it was the early 2000s, so VHS did still exist. It was sort of a footage of the Second World War, and it had like a Johnny Cash kind of song overlay on it. And he's like, could you help me get up on this big screen? he's got one, 20-year-old, so he knew I could do it, and it was easy. So I went along to this assembly just to push, to set it up and just push play at the time. And as I kind of sat there listening to Bob speak, he kind of pinpointed, he looked around the assembly room where they had like the names of the students that had fought in the First World War and the Second World War from that very school, and he started talking about their families and those young people and their achievements in the school, and he talked about their involvement in the war and the suffering that they went through. And then he kind of linked it to the faith, and he talked about a suffering Jesus, and he gave a whole lens for these young people to kind of connect to these people who were very much part of their school family. You could hear a pin drop in that assembly, and it was very humbling for me, who thought, like my jovial sort of entertaining kind of assemblies, just seeing that this retired minister could take it to a whole higher level. And I know that for our church schools here, with the chaplains we have here, and the people that are getting involved in assemblies, there's a real privilege, and we heard about that yesterday, of being able to connect and understand the wider world through a Christian lens, and the importance of that connection. So that's a little bit about myself. I just want to share. What have I controlled here?
I don't think they really got me.
Don't worry about it. Just got 3 videos and music. This makes life a lot easier. Just want to share 4 resources. I guess that's in the youth ministry department where I work. My role, I guess, is primarily about supporting churches and youth workers, I guess, with resources, with training, advocating for youth ministry, a network, and I guess there's a bit of an overlap with Stephanie's role as well. So there's opportunities there for crossover. I want to share maybe a resource that may be of interest to you. And I know that Paul's going to speak a little bit in more depth of this when he comes on, but this is a piece of research that came out in 2019. It's from Barna. It's called The Connected Generation, if you were Googling it, which you're not allowed to do just now. Is that right? Connected Generation, maybe write that down. It's from Barna, and if you look at this, the New Zealand edition, it's the biggest piece of recent research, I guess, done. It's globally done, 15,000 young adults, across 25 countries, including 500 here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so it's kind of fascinating to be kind of comparing globally how our young people are doing and how they compare and contrast. Some of the things I'm going to probably say now, I was just going to share a couple of the sort of early on insights in there, just to kind of give you a little bit of a tease for what's in here. Is the first thing it kind of picks out is the anxiety levels with our young people, our young adults in our country, and how it kind of is raised, elevated over the norms. Globally, those stats would be 1 in 5. 20% level of people feeling anxious, whilst here in New Zealand it's 3 in 10, so like 30%. How does Barna define anxiety? Barna defines anxiety by for young people feeling at least 3 of the following: being anxious about important decisions, sad and depressed, insecure in who they are, or afraid to fail. And so that's a sort of interesting sort of insight for the people that we work with. And obviously and clearly COVID's had a raised effect in that as well. For the young people that I talk to, like I volunteer as a youth leader in my church, the sort of conversations I have with young people is they talk about a sort of constant state of bombardment or stress, I guess, around social media. They talk about how one day they've got an issue of the day, and today it might be the Palestine issue. And all of a sudden they're having to post and say their opinion on the state of Palestine and the current politics there. They haven't necessarily had a sort of, I mean, I think how long I studied Palestine when I was at high school, that amount of education around what's happened in the last 70, 80 years in that area. But there's a real pressure for them to say something and to say it, which is the correct answer. And of course, stressing through that all day, the next day is another issue. And so these are the sort of issues that exist for young people. The other piece, and they ended up naming the whole research around this, is the connected generation. Noting, and we heard this yesterday as well, didn't we? The importance for young people to be connected to the wider world, to be connected around about them. And it kind of starts grouping young people and young adults into three areas: people of weak connectivity, medium connectivity, and high connectivity. And what the research shows, and it shows quite clearly, and if I had, or maybe I should just read some of these things, it really lists, that for young adults that have weak or medium connectivity, they have a real lack of optimism. They struggle with having strong interpersonal skills. But those that have strong levels of connectivity, they experience boosted well-being and across several realms of life. And I could show you the kind of stats around this, but the one that I'm going to tell you about, which is really interesting for our context, is this one. It's around those three areas, and the percentages of young people, young adults, that have that stronger level of connectivity. And this is fascinating, and they have all the global stats here. But this one here is particularly interesting, where it compares those young adults and young people that have a Christian faith and compare that to ones that don't have a Christian faith. And they actually have stats here around people with other faiths as well. But for young people in this country that don't have a Christian faith, only 20% of them feel connected, are in that high connectivity rating. But for those that have a Christian faith, that's 37%. Fascinating. And over here, when you look at this book and you spend your $19 on that website and get all the research, it has huge implications in life and where they see themselves. Sharing our special character in our schools is really valuable. So and I just want to say that I guess my final conclusion from these stats and stuff that you can read about later is for our roles as chaplains or in schools, what we can be to these people, for our young students that are in this sort of need for having high connectivity and who are anxious, is that we need to be a peaceful presence. We bring a non-anxious presence, We need to be people that are interpreters, help them discern the culture, to help them understand the big picture of life, and bring that big Christian story towards it. My next slide that isn't up there, and this is my second area, was I was going to do a little bit of interesting talk about the brain. And on the brain picture, I was going to just highlight three parts of the brain. And I'm going to start by saying stuff that you already know. There was going to be a little arrow to the prefrontal cortex, there was going to be an arrow to the amygdala, and then another arrow to the anterior cingulate. The prefrontal cortex, you'll know that's like the sort of CEO of the brain. It's the part of the brain which is thinking about decision-making, prioritizing. It's the bit that's the wisdom. And the interesting thing about the prefrontal cortex is we always thought that the brain, the prefrontal cortex, was fully developed at the age of 6, and about 20 or so years ago with the MRI, and you'll probably know this already, with the ability to scan people's brains without any effect, is that they discovered it doesn't actually get fully developed into the mid-20s. And so for people that aren't advocates for young people in our society, they might just think, oh, well, there you go. Teenagers are idiots. Their brains aren't developed. But for those of us in our sphere of line of work, when we are passionate about young people and have that sort of God lens, it's like, oh, God created young people in this way. We kind of start thinking about a wonder to behold, and we start thinking, wow, young people are such a gift to our society, to our community, to our schools. They come with the abilities to take risks, to have passion, and we need that in our society. It's a different viewpoint. So that's the prefrontal cortex, and the arrow to the amygdala, and that's the kind of the opposite to the prefrontal cortex. It's the kind of the sort of fear center, It's the bit that kind of makes us freaky out. So I guess when we pay our good money to go to a roller coaster or a haunted house, and I never do that, it's the bit that even though logically, even though our prefrontal cortex is saying, hey, it's completely safe to be on this roller coaster, hey, I know this is just a haunted house and there's nothing to worry about. When you go in there and you walk and you're getting chased by somebody or you're going around the roller coaster, our amygdala's freaking out and it's kind of overriding the prefrontal cortex, and that's why we pay our good money for that. But the other arrow on my slide would be pointing to the anterior cingulate. This is why I wanted to mention this today. It's kind of a buffer, it's in the middle, it's a sort of seesaw, and it's the part of our brain that allows for compassion. It's the part of the brain that helps us think about others. It's almost like the God part of the brain in my head. But there's some really interesting research and scientific data that came out from a leading neuroscientist, I think it was 2016, so really new stuff, Andrew Newberg, and he released some interesting studies around the development of the anterior cingulate, how you can grow, kind of, I guess, your anterior cingulate. And he did this in conjunction with a therapist, Mark Robert Woolwood, and you can read about it in a book called How God Changes Your Brain. But in their studies, and this is like blows me away, but it kind of is science backing up faith, I guess, is that they found that the number one thing you can do for a young, or for any person, I guess, to develop their anterior cingulate is through prayer and meditation. Now, these people are not Christians. This is what's also fascinating, is that prayer and meditation is the number one way to develop your anterior cingulate. The studies found out and published said that just 8 to 10 minutes of prayer and reflection, prayer and meditation, 6 times a week, so 6 days a week for 2 months, can increase the person's anterior cingulate by 50%, which is just crazy. And most interestingly, the second, and it's to be fair, it's a long way off, but prayer and meditation is number one. The second biggest way to increase your, to develop your anterior cingulate is through faith-based singing. Faith-based singing. It's not just listening to music, it's actually singing it out loud, and it's also, it must be faith-based. And so you kind of think about what we do in our schools, and you kind of think about our Christian development, like 6 days a week for 2 months, and your anterior cingulate expands by 50%, and it's permanent. It's literally rewiring your brain. I don't know if that's technically true, but you know, it's just incredible to think about our role with our special character in our schools. And I'll just quickly mention a couple of other things. I mentioned earlier the possibility in our youth ministry department to work in collaboration with Stephanie in the Church Schools Resource Office. And one of the projects we're currently working on, and certainly she'll be promoting it when it's done, is a project to be working on a school leavers resource, to be working from a special character kind of viewpoint, to be helping the sort of transition from high school to university, and I guess potentially into the workforce, but predominantly for young people that are moving city at that stage. Certainly from a faith perspective, you know, it's a big exit point for young people. And so we're working together on this resource for students, for parents, for churches, for schools, to be thinking through that stage of life, helping planning moves, staying connected with a student's home church if they have one, giving advice, for example, the importance of serving when you move, rather than kind of consuming, getting connected with people like Jordan Redding. I mean, how awesome was he yesterday? He's a university chaplain at Otago, connecting with these sort of people, helping parents suggest that you help your young person that's moving to think through their first 2 weeks and kind of starting to think about a little plan, and encouraging ongoing connections between trusted adults and students. I guess that's so important now for that age bracket, to have stability in a very transient point of life, to have adults that they know care for them. And so that's part of the role, I guess, of churches and parents, to be thinking about how they can be connected, making sure there's a consistency there with adults in their lives. And finally, I just want to share one other project I think that has the real potential to be used in schools. In the Youth Ministry Department last year, we created a leadership sort of film series, a sort of a leadership course. It's 12 sessions long. For each session, there's like sort of 15-20-minute video. They were created by us, but the host of the video series is a young woman in her 20s called Jasmine, and she just kind of goes around the country interviewing different ministers and other great thinkers in the young adult sphere. And this leadership course is targeting emerging leaders, sort of year 12 and year 13 students. And it has sessions like what are my gifts, thinking about self-care, character of a kingdom leader, etc., etc., etc. And along with the video comes, sort of a leader's facilitation guide, so that's like maybe a half an hour worth of sort of activities and questions, great questions to kind of analyse it. And for me personally, I've been doing that with a group of year 12 and year 13 students that are in my church, and all of this year, and it's been going very well, and it's something I would recommend. In a church setting that I've been doing it, that's looked like I've also included, in addition to these monthly catch-ups that we do, I've been getting them involved in service projects, leadership opportunities in our church, and also getting good mentors around them. But how that works in your school, you probably have those sort of things in place as well. But do Google that. That's not right now. Emerge, and if you just Google Emerge and PYM, you can go there. You can watch straight away. You can watch one of the videos. But if you just fill in the form right there, you would send it off, and immediately you get an email right back with the links to all 12 videos, the leaders' guides, the student journals, all that sort of stuff. I think that is a real possibility for you to use that in your schools. So Google Emerge and PYM, or just pym.org.nz/emerge. So I guess that was the 4 things I wanted to share. Reminded, I guess, as a church, as a schools, we're part of the same whānau, part of that same Presbyterian whānau, and I love the connections that exist. As a Wellingtonian, I love to see the connections in our city. I know right now, David Jackson, is he there? Oh, he's right up the back. This morning, there's 3 chapel services that David isn't doing. And so the minister from St John's in the City right now, with that sort of connection, is leading those 3 assemblies. I know that Queen Margaret, I was going to say St Lawrence, can't see Jeanette, but they have St Lawrence Church, have great connections with Knox Church that's right next door. I know that Queen Margaret College, I love to hear stories like on Shrove Tuesday, when the local parish church comes along and the people in the congregation are sitting there making pancakes for all the students on that day. So having these connections is positive, and certainly I encourage that to continue, because that's good for both sides. I was going to finish off by mentioning we're whānau, because I was going to pass you on to the children's and family. That's my nice little connection, but I'm going to finish up right there. Thank you, guys.
She talked to us this morning about Ruth in Naomi, a team. We've been thinking a lot about who we are and what we do. Last night's leaders of our dinner were a team that worked together. We in New Zealand are a team of 5 million. One of my sons is a police officer and he's just got a new job. And I was asking him the other day, what are you going to do? And he said, I'm leading a team. I said, who's in your team? And we talked about the different people that were in their team and how excited he is, even after being in the police for 15 years, what this team will do in our country. We were chatting the other night at the table about this thing, about Ron and Phil and Gordon and what a team that they are. 1 Corinthians 17 to 20. If the whole body were an eye, we would have a sense of hearing them. If the whole body were an ear, we would have a sense of smelling them. But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. We have a team, a mission team. Thank you so much, each one of us, for letting us in to a part of your team. We want to be on that team with you. If we can't do it physically, we can do it prayerfully. And thank each one of you as you deliver on your team. You are making a difference, not only in Aotearoa, but across the world, in parts that need teamwork. Thank you for showing us what it looks like. Bless you all.